Sheet music is written on something sort of like a graph. You have all these lines stacked on top of each other, and you put notes on them. And the horizontal part of it determines when you play a note. So, in a sense, the x-axis is time. And the vertical part determines which note you're going to play. So, the y-axis is pitch. Now, I've covered rhythm and the time aspects of music before, so for this series, I just want to focus on the pitch. How do you know which note you're supposed to play, and how do you eventually get really good at that, at being able to read sheet music and play it fluidly? Now, you are probably in one of three categories. One, you've never really read music before, in which case this particular video is for you. I just want to do a kind of basic introduction to how music is set up, how do you know which note is which, and what's the right mental model to have. Category 2 is you know how to read music, but you struggle to do it fast. It maybe takes you a little time to figure out which note is which, in which case the next video, that's what I want to address. How do you recognize patterns? How do you get to where you can play things very quickly? And then category 3, you can read well, you can play fast and quick and all that, and in which case this really isn't targeted to you at all, so sorry. So, the basics. You can place a note on a line or on a space. So when you put a note on a line, it looks like this. And when you put a note on a space, it looks like that. Keep in mind there's nothing in between. It's either on a line or it's on a space, nothing else. And the way the note is oriented, whether the stem is facing up or facing down, doesn't matter. It's just the head of the note that determines which line or space it's on. Now, if you place a note up high, it's a high note or high pitch, so more towards this end of the piano. And if you place a note down low, it's more towards this end. It's a low pitch. Now, these lines and spaces, they go up forever, to infinity. There is no limit to how high you can put notes, and there's no limit to how low you can put notes. But there is a limit to human hearing, so at some point you won't be able to hear them. So that's a bit of a limit, sort of a soft limit. And then there's also any instrument you're writing for, there is a range to that instrument. So my piano, for example, ends, here and here. So there's a bit of a practical limit there too. But keep in mind, these lines and spaces go on forever. Now, every one of these lines and spaces represents a natural note. So a note like A, B, C, D, E, F, or G. A note like A sharp or E flat. You can't get to those notes by just placing a note down. You have to use special symbols along with it, which we'll get to in a minute. So just natural notes. Now, side note, I am going to kind of assume that you are familiar with a major scale. You at least have a basic idea of what these black notes are, like a sharp or a flat, and that you're somewhat familiar with a basic chord, like major chord or minor chord. If not, the description has links for that stuff. So the way this is laid out is pretty much just like the white notes on a piano. You have all these natural notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then they start again, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. So kind of the same idea. Now you'll notice that everything looks the same. In fact, this mess of lines and spaces is kind of intimidating. So you need some kind of reference point or some way of knowing which line is which or which space is which. So for example, if I put a note down, say here, and I wanted you to play it, I would have to somehow tell you what it is. So one way for me to do that is to just label it. I could stick the note G down here, and you would know that that line or this note is a G. And we'll just kind of have this gentleman's agreement that when I say G, I'm talking about this G, the one just a bit above middle C, around 400 hertz, I think. Yeah, it's around 400 hertz, right there. Now, it used to be that that's exactly how it worked. If you picked up an old sheet of music, there would just be a G right there to tell you what that is. Over time, that G got written fancier and fancier, and eventually it wound up looking like this. And we'll see if I can draw this. Okay, that's not too bad. That, believe it or not, is a silly looking G. We call it a G clef, or more commonly a treble clef. But this is just a label. It's saying this line is a G, and you can kind of see there's this little crosshairs right in the middle of the scrolly part that that centers on that line. So that line is a G. Now that is technically enough. You could start from there, and knowing that, it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G and repeats, you could say, okay, well, if this note is a G, then the one right above it must be an A, and this is a B, and you could go as far in either direction as you needed to. But most of the time, if I'm, using this line as a reference, I'm probably going to be putting most of my notes right around here, and it doesn't make sense to include all this extra stuff. In fact, I can't put an infinite set of lines and spaces on a sheet of paper. So it was at some point just kind of agreed upon that we will use we'll use exactly 5 lines, and we'll kind of make that our default, section of this graph that we're going to work with. So I'll get rid of this extra stuff and we'll look at that. So we've cut it down to just 5 lines, and we're just going to work with this for now. And this is what we call the musical staff. It's just this set of 5 lines and 4 spaces. Now, even though everything else is hidden now, remember that it's still there. It's as if we're like peering through a mail slot into somebody's house and seeing this little sliver, but everything else is still there. In fact, if I wanted to put a note down on one of these lines that used to be underneath, I could just draw it in to show you where it goes. So if it was just one line underneath, I could put it there. If I needed to go to a line farther down, I would just have to draw the lines in as I go to show you where that note goes. So just remember, everything is still there. Now, hopefully, whatever music we're writing happens to be right around this area. If it falls on these lines and spaces, that's great. If we need to use those little lines to get some of those notes that are lower or higher, that's fine. But if we're writing music for an instrument like a cello or a bass guitar or maybe a tuba or something, most of the notes that those instruments play, their typical range, is quite a bit lower. So they would be playing notes way down here, and it would be a pain to have to write a whole bunch of little lines for every one. It'd be really hard to read. So what we could do is just use a different reference point and set up our staff somewhere down here. So I could say, all right, I'm going to use this F right here as my reference point, and I could take that and build a staff around that. Now, same deal as before. Originally, it was just written as an F. It got fancier and fancier over time, and now it looks like this. At least that's the best I can draw it. And I guess it kind of looks like an F if you use your imagination, like these are the lines. I don't know why it needs to be so fancy and confusing, but that is an F clef, or more commonly called a bass clef. Same deal though, it just tells you where you're going to play. And same as before, we work with 5 lines, so we cut this down and we'll look at our staff for the bass clef. Now, these are the main 2 clefs. We have treble clef and bass clef. There is actually another one, and I just want to show it to you briefly. It's not nearly as common, but it is what's called a C clef. I actually can't draw this one very well. It looks something like that. This labels this line as a C, and actually everything checks out. If you look at it, if this is an F, the space is a G, A, B, and C. So the C clef is middle C, and it uses those 5 lines. And there is a slight variation on this. This is called C clef or alto clef. And then tenor clef looks exactly the same, except you use those 5 lines. And I don't know how well that looks on camera. Just like that. I don't really want to erase this other stuff because I'm going to need it. Basically, it looks, I'll draw it real tiny. Looks sort of like that. I hope you can see it. It's like the clef is sort of hanging off the staff for some reason. And then the normal version, the normal alto clef, looks sort of like that. You're not likely to see those unless you play viola. So most likely you'll deal with it if you're a viola player, but I just wanted to mention that so you kind of know what that is if you happen to see it. All right, so for the most part, treble clef and bass clef is what you're going to be using, but if you play a keyboard instrument like a piano, the piano has a really large range, and you tend to use 2 hands where you're playing a high part and a low part, and it's actually hard to fit that on the treble clef or on the bass clef. It just uses such a large range that it doesn't fit so well. So you use something called a grand staff, which is actually just this right here. It is a combination of the treble clef and the bass clef. But there is one really weird quirk about that. So let me get this stuff out of the way and I'll show you what I mean. So in an ideal world, grand staff would look just like this, and this is very simple and makes perfect sense. We just took that infinite set of lines and spaces, we carved out this little area here to work with, treble clef, and then right underneath it we have the bass clef. And in between there's one line, although it's hidden, it's because it's not on either staff, but this is just middle C. Remember, this is F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Everything lines up and it's perfect. But the grand staff is almost never actually written down like this. It lines up perfectly. It should be this way, but it's not. Most of the time on paper, these two staves are pushed apart. There's a whole bunch of extra space in between them, and they no longer line up the way they should. So I'll move this down and show you. So this is what a grand staff typically looks like when it's written down. And it feels as if there's a lot of space between this staff and this one, but there isn't. So for example, if I put a note, say on the bass clef, like this note right here would be a G, and then an A, then a B, and I decided to put a note right here on that first ledger line. And then say I went up to the treble clef, started on this bottom line, I went down, this is an E, this is a D, and then this is a C right there. It looks as if these two notes are a fair ways apart, right? There's plenty of space between this one and that one, so it feels as if I need to go up a few pitches to get to here. But these are actually the exact same note. Both of these mean play middle C. And the reason is that these two staves are slid apart artificially. If you imagine this whole bottom part sliding back up again to where this note lined right up with this note, that's the correct way to visualize things. This has been pushed down to give some extra space for more notes in the left hand or the right hand, or a lot of times there'll be little musical symbols written in here and things like that. It is very confusing to visualize, and it can cause a lot of problems, especially when you're trying to figure out, which, even if I know this is a C, which one is it, or which one is that, and where on the piano am I supposed to be? So just spend a little time making sure you understand what's happening here, because this is a painful little point for a lot of people when they're trying to learn to read music on the grand staff. So that's pretty much the whole deal as far as understanding how the staves work and how the music is set up. And if all you remembered is these two reference points, remember this is a G and this is an F, you could, as long as you were patient, figure out what every note is on every line and every space, even the ones that go way up high on the ledger lines or way down low. Now, obviously that takes a long time and is somewhat painful. So there's a couple tricks you can use to make it a little bit quicker. And you may have heard of a couple of these. So the spaces on top, you can figure it out from the reference point, but I'll just tell you this bottom space here is an F, this one's an A, this one's a C, and this one's an E, and that spells face. So face rhymes with space, and that's a pretty easy way to remember those. The lines, you can remember the usual one that I heard growing up was every good boy deserves fudge. Remember the lines down on the bottom. The spaces are A, C, E, G, or all cows eat grass. And then the lines are great big dogs fight animals. Now here's the thing. These little tricks, they're pretty handy for remembering what line is what space is what. They're pretty easy to remember, but if you just stick with this and you remember these things and you start practicing and figuring out what note is what, I promise you, you will be terrible at reading music, possibly forever. These are little crutches. They're little things to kind of help you out at the very beginning. But if you're using this as a way to figure out notes long term, you're going to struggle badly to ever get good and fluid at reading this stuff. And like I said, that is a topic that we'll explore in depth in the next video. Now there's one more thing I need to show you here in order to have the full picture. As I said, the lines and spaces only represent natural notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. They do not show you, or they don't They don't let you write things like A sharp or D sharp without using other symbols. And that has to do with the fundamental design of sheet music and really Western music in general. So in an octave, say from A at 440 hertz to A at 880 hertz, we cut the octave into 12 parts. We have A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, and so on. We have 12 different pitches in there. But most of the time, we just want to work with 7. That's how most of our scales and keys are designed. Major scale, 7 notes. Minor scale, 7 notes. All the modes, all that stuff. It's usually 7 notes. So sheet music is designed to just show you 7 notes, A through G. And at any given time, it pretty much just assumes that you only want to work with 7. Now, by default, those 7 are A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, which is the notes in C major scale or an A minor scale. But if I wanted to work with a different set of 7, say I wanted to do something in the key of G, so G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp, I would have to change the way the graph works. So what I would do is I would use this symbol, put it where you can see it. This is a sharp symbol. It means take a note, in our case we're going to use F, and raise it up to here. Like I said, I'm going to assume you're more or less familiar with how a sharp works, or at least the idea of a sharp note. So if I put that note, or put that sharp symbol up here, at the very beginning of the music, what I'm saying is that I now want this line, F, to now represent an F sharp. And in fact, I want every F in this entire piece of music to now be interpreted as an F sharp. So that includes a note that goes up here on this F line. It includes a note that goes here on this space. And it actually would put that same symbol in the bass clef so that you could kind of see it when you're looking at either one. And this would say, same deal. This becomes an F sharp. Any F anywhere becomes an F sharp. That is what's called a key signature. It is a key to the graph in a sense. Now I could also use the flat symbol, which looks like this. That's the same idea, except it lowers a note. So if I wanted to do, say, a B flat, I could put that flat symbol on there and say we need to lower the B. So I would put it here. I wouldn't have that sharp. You wouldn't be doing both at the same time. And I have a few lessons on keys and circle of fifths and how that kind of stuff works if you want to get a little more in depth with that stuff. But I'd be putting this little flat symbol here. Same deal. This means that every B in the entire piece now becomes a B flat. And I would use that if I was trying to play in, say, the key of F major. Now there's another thing you might want to do. Say I'm playing in the key of C major, meaning I just want everything to be normal notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. So that's my C key. But say for a little while, I want to stick an F sharp in there. I don't want everything to be changed. I'm not changing keys, but I just want to have that note in there. That's what's called an accidental. It's a note that doesn't actually fit with the rest of the key. So what I would do is take that same little sharp symbol and I would stick it in front of a note somewhere in the music. Now, in this case, this doesn't affect everything everywhere. It affects the notes that come after it. So, like I said before, or maybe I didn't, music is broken up into sections. And I've covered this in the rhythm lessons, but it works in measures. So this is called a measure line or a bar line. It sections it off, and I'm out of space, but there'd be another one, off to the right, sectioning that off as well. And you have these little chunks. And the sharp symbol affects any note that comes after it on whatever line or space you put it on until you get to the end of the measure. So if I had an F right here, this sharp would turn this into an F sharp. It would turn this F into an F sharp. But if I had one over here in the next measure, it would have gone back to normal. This note does not get affected. And that sharp doesn't work retroactively. So if I had an F right here, this one is not affected. So this would be an F natural, this would be an F sharp, this would also be an F sharp, and this would be an F natural. And keep in mind that when you have a sharp or a flat somewhere in the piece, not in the key signature, it only affects the line or space that it's put on. So it would not change this F into an F sharp. Now there's There's also what's called a natural symbol, which is like an undo. It means undo that sharp. So this would be F natural, this would be F sharp, this would be back to F natural, and this would also be an F natural. It's a little bit confusing, and I do have some lessons that talk about intervals and sharps in a little bit more depth if you want to spend a little more time with that, but the basic principle is pretty straightforward. And flats work the exact same way. Down here, if I put a flat, well, F is kind of an odd note to flat. So let's say I did a B flat. I could put a flat in front of that. It would affect this note as well. It would not affect that one. It wouldn't affect a note up here or anything. So that's the basic idea behind sharps, flats, and the natural symbols. And remember, natural symbol would undo that flat same way. So B flat, B natural, B natural. Now, I'm getting tired of drawing and erasing and redrawing musical notes and lines, so I'm going to leave it at that. But like I said, next lesson is kind of what I'm leading up to. That's the one that I really want to spend some time on because I have a lot that I'd like to say about the mental approach to learning to read and learning it quickly and recognizing patterns and things like that. And I feel like there's not a lot of teaching on that topic. There is plenty of teaching explaining the basics like I have here. This is really just a setup for that. So thanks for sticking it out. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. I will catch you next time.